Hello, everyone. I'm Lori Murray, President of the Committee for Economic Development of the Conference Board, and welcome to our September 2020 edition of Policy Watch. It will be my pleasure to host this conversation with our esteemed panel of congressmen and CEOs as we focus on the frontline economic and business issues for the 2020 election. CED recently released its 2020 Solution Briefs Election Series Compendium. It's a series focused on nonpartisan reasoned solutions in the nation's interest. The election series provides analysis and solutions in four main areas: reopening and reorienting the economy, including upskilling the workforce, improving remote schooling, revitalizing our education system, reforming healthcare, and meeting the needs in a fiscally responsible manner. During this program, we'll be addressing many of these critical issues facing our economy and society. We intend to reveal bipartisan policy and business solutions to help the U.S. excel in the post-COVID-19 global economy. Of course, please remember to use the chat pod to ask your questions or provide comments. We'll try to address as many questions as possible throughout the program. But before we begin this discussion, please note that CPE credits are available for this webcast. If you would like to receive credits, please stay online for the entirety of the live webcast and click the link in the CEU request pod in the bottom right-hand corner of the webcast console to sign up for credit. In addition, please make sure to click on the three pop-ups that will appear on the screen throughout the program. Next slide, please. There we go. Oops. Okay, our program will consist of two panel sessions, a perspective from Capitol Hill and followed by a perspective from our business leaders. Our distinguished guests today include Congressman Josh Gothammer, New Jersey's 5th Congressional District, Congressman Thomas Reed, New York's 23rd Congressional District. They are co-chairs of the House Problem Solvers Caucus and dedicated to finding bipartisan solutions, which is also CED's mission. Our second panel will include CED trustees, Byron Boston, President and CEO of Dynex Capital, Tom McInerney, President and CEO of Genworth Financial, and Sheeta Bina, founding partner of Insigniam. So now let's begin with our first panel for a public policy perspective. Congressman Reed, Congressman Gotthammer, welcome. We are going to talk about solutions, but first I want to ask you about the problem. COVID-19 has upended many norms and assumptions, including about American politics. And according to recent polling data, the American economy is not the leading issue among American voters. A Gallup poll in August found the coronavirus as the most important issue facing the nation, followed by government leadership, with economic matters for the first time in a very long time, such as unemployment or the economy, generally ranked third, just above racial issues. So I'm wondering, what are you hearing from your constituents? What do they see as the most important issues in this election?
Well, I appreciate it, Lori. Great to be with you, and great to be with my friend Josh Gothammer here and talking about the issues of the day. But I think your poll is picking up exactly what we're hearing quite a bit about in our district of Western New York, my hometown of Corning, and I will tell you, people are getting frustrated with the lack of getting things done for the American people in Congress, and that's why the Problem Solvers Caucus, this group of 50 members, 25 Democrats, 25 Republicans, I founded it with Josh Gothammer. I co-chair it on the Republican side, he leads it on the Democratic side, and what we are committed to doing is when we get to consensus, we are committed to staying in the room to find the common ground of the solutions that are necessary to the biggest problem. We put together what we call the March for Common Ground on a $1.5 trillion package where we showed our leadership and the White House that we needed an additional stimulus package for COVID-19, as was highlighted in your survey of folks that they're concerned, and we got people hurting as we speak. And so we came together on issues for additional stimulus, unemployment, issues dealing with child care in America, K through 12, higher education, additional needs in healthcare, additional needs for our agricultural industry, and beyond. And you could find common ground. And we changed the narrative last week. When what was declared dead on arrival on the Monday when we returned, by the end of the week, we had the president talking about it, we had our leadership talking about it, and making a commitment to stay here until we got additional relief flowing back to the people that we work for, and that's the American citizens. And so we are trying to break this gridlock, and with good people like Josh Gottheimer and the members of the Problem Solvers Caucus, we're telling our leadership, if you don't want to lead and you want to play politics 24/7, get out of the way and let a new generation of leaders emerge that are going to do that work. So thanks for having us on, and we'll continue to keep moving
thanks for
forward.
coming. And Congressman Gotthammer, what are you hearing from your district?
Well, thank you, and Lori, thank you so much for having us and for bringing us all together. And our good friend Tom McInerney, I know, is very involved in this effort, and speaks so well of this. And so thank you really for inviting us. And I'm sorry, I'm in an office off the Capitol right now, so I have a very bright green background. It's to wake everybody up in case you're sleeping. Reed just continues to sip his coffee in his congressional-looking backdrop, and so some of us are still out here working hard, Reed. One thing you'll see from us pretty quickly, and what Tom and I try to do, is really look for ways to govern, to put country before party, and to focus on getting things done. When I hear from my constituents more than anything, Lori, is please work together and actually stop fighting and start focusing on us. And really that is, you cut through all of it. There's lots of issues out there. I think just people want us to do our jobs. And the 25 Democrats and 25 Republicans in the Problem Solvers Caucus, we have plenty of differences on issues, but what we try to do at the end of the day is look for 80% solutions where we can get to, with both sides, like we got 80% of what we wanted. And I think the economy, when you look at, you mentioned that poll, yes, COVID and the economic crisis and the health crisis tied to COVID are top of mind. Obviously, where I'm from in New Jersey, we've lost more than 3,700 people in the counties that represent my district. It's just been devastating. And small businesses are hurting. 22% of our independent restaurants have gone out of business. 14% unemployment. It continues to weigh very heavily. That's why the economy is very tied. So I know it may not be at the top of the list, but the economy and the economic crisis is so closely tied to the health crisis around COVID that they are linked. And you think of why, as Tom mentioned, why we came together in a bipartisan way and encouraging our leaderships, Democrats and Republicans, and the White House to get back to the table and get something done on the next COVID package. It's because things like PPP, which are small business loans, and doing another round, which we encouraged, are key, because those are jobs. Those are key to putting food on the table. And yes, testing at the top of the list. Yes, making sure our schools are okay, but making sure that that people have have food security but really when people are going through this health crisis, and we hope to God that another shoe doesn't drop here in the fall and flu season, but we want to be prepared, and part of that is being prepared on an economic side. So I'm very concerned about the economy. It's why I think it's really important that we continue to invest to strengthen it, and do it in a smart, responsible way.
Take you back to the process. On the Republican side, Secretary Mnuchin just said 2 days ago that the president would support additional funding for the Paycheck Protection Program immediately. What are the issues? And you both, as you pointed out, have put out this bipartisan proposal. It's comprehensive. What do you see on the Republican side as the issues that are still causing a problem in terms of bringing the sides together? And Congressman Gottheimer, you're having similar problems with leadership on the Democratic side. What are the areas that are most contentious in terms of bridging this divide, and how do you think that the prospects for success are possible as we go deeper and deeper into this election cycle? We're something like 40 days away now.
So, Lori, really the policy differences can be worked out. What the problem is it's all politics right now. And this is when you actually, because we've been working on this for 6 weeks behind the scene, you talk to folks, And there is a very strong political objection to doing anything. There's this notion that if you do something and you help people out, that somehow it's going to protect the president. You're going to upset the political calculations that have been reached on both sides of the aisle, and therefore don't do anything. Let's just ride this out till the election day. And it's so wrong, because so many American businesses, individuals, families are going to be hurting unnecessarily. We could agree to a lot of these issues. Now, you got issues with state and local aid, you got issues with unemployment, but these are dialed. These are issues that can be worked out if you stay in the room, listen to each other, because that's what we did. That's what we did. We're 50 members of the caucus, and we cannot issue the Problem Solvers Caucus seal of approval unless we get at least 75% consensus of the caucus agreeing. And we got well past that. And we not only have moderate members of the caucus, we have some of the most hard left and hard right members in the group. The common denominator is they are pragmatic members. They're proud Republicans, they're proud Democrats, but they're willing to listen to each other, trust each other, and come to a solution. And so when you have an issue like state and local aid, for example, what brought people together on that issue is when you started talking about it from a perspective of accountability and not use a blank check type of approach where, you know, some people have talked about this bailout type of mentality associated with it. And you said, we're not going to do state and local aid on projections. It's going to be based on actual expenses for local governments and state governments that are associated responding to COVID-19 that you can show receipts for. And then it's actual documented, certified, auditable loss of revenue, pre-COVID-19, post-COVID-19, that you present to the federal government and you certify that loss of revenue. That brought people together. It was based on good governance, and people then coalesced around the solution. And we had the same conversation on unemployment. We had the same conversation on multiple of other issues that were still driving people apart. But those were the big policy issues. But when you actually stayed in the room and listened to each other, the solutions tended to come to the top of the pile, and we were able to work them out. But if politics is what's motivating you, you are not going to get to a solution, and that's what's overtaking D.C. right now. And it's so frustrating because real people are hurting.
Congressman Gotthammer, what do you see as the main obstacle?
You know, through our conversations, and I'm sure you've seen publicly that some of the issues, and this just builds on what Tom wisely said, like the state and local resources, and you know, some folks don't think we should help out state and local governments, and what I think the agreement we came to said, listen, if the COVID-related expenditure, if it's a revenue loss from COVID and that's affected a small town to a county to a state government, and it means that we're not going to be able to pay our teachers and our firefighters and law enforcement, you know, it's just like what we do in any other crisis when there's a hurricane or a tornado. We're there for each other, and if we've been in the eye of the COVID storm, like New York, where Tom is from, or New Jersey, where I'm from, and other states now have been hit so hard, we've got to look out for each other. That's what we do, and as long as there's clear transparency and accountability, which is key to make sure, you know, the idea we pushed out and that we suggested is similar to the way FEMA does things. After a disaster, you actually have to have receipts and prove revenue loss to prove expenditures. And so those are the resources we were able to come up with, and that was a big move, but it was a contentious one. And you might imagine there's other issues that like that we came to an agreement on, including on liability issues and worker protection issues. So some other issues that have been trickier politically, but ones by spending time together and talking to one another, which is really what we do. We spend, I don't know, Tom, 6 weeks working on that, on getting to an agreement, hundreds of hours of us all talking. Again, it's 50 people, 25 Democrats, 25 Republicans. It's hard to get 2 people to agree who are in the same party, nonetheless trying to get 50 of us. And the way we do it is we have to get to 75, 3/4 of us have to vote for something in order for it to pass. We were much higher than that in this case, but it's not easy. But the point is, if you develop relationships, if you develop trust, if you spend time together and get to know one another, and then you listen to each other, don't just talk, which is, you know, politicians don't always listen. If you listen to one another and what the issues are that you have for your district and where you're from and where they're from and their issues, it's amazing how you can actually make progress. The challenge now is like, listen, our leaderships, they don't hang out together. They don't spend time together. There's no basis of trust. And, you know, there's plenty of reasons why there aren't. But you know, if they spent more time together over the years, not just in a crisis mode when the government's about to shut down, but times otherwise, you can develop relationships. You know, I know Tom's family. They're wonderful family. Tom's one of 12 kids. I like to say I'm the lucky 13. And you know, you get to know each other and the issues that Tom cares about. And again, plenty that Tom disagree on policy, but the way we disagree matters. And I just have to be honest with you, that's everything.
Bipartisan proposal, and you know, as you both were saying, this is and as Chairman Powell made really clear on the Hill as well, that we're really not going to get the economy back. We're really not going to get back to work until Americans feel comfortable that they can engage, safe that they can engage. And so if you could just add some detail on what you're seeing in terms of what's needed on the pandemic pieces of your legislation in terms of testing, and Congressman Gotthammer, if you can also then, I'm going to ask you to address the unemployment piece of this, but I'd like to start with the healthcare piece and where you see what's necessary there, and also in terms of the vaccine.
So in our proposal, we allocated $25 billion minimum to additional testing and to additional resources on the actual healthcare crisis itself. And remember, our proposal was really designed, we kind of shortened the time horizon to get us through March. It was March to common ground, and to really try to get us through the immediate future to get us through this election cycle in particular. And so what we did on that front was to recognize the ultimate solution to this problem is going to be the vaccine. That once we get to a safe and effective vaccine, and that's why we also built into this proposal what we call the reducers and the boosters, so that it's 1.5 trillion at its heart, but if we have a successful vaccine and we don't have hospitalizations going through the roof, there would be kind of a pullback of some of this money, some of this resource that's put out there, because we wouldn't need it. So it could go down to 1.3 trillion. But if we don't have a vaccine, if it's not widely distributed, and the hospitalizations go through the roof because, God forbid, the virus comes roaring back, it would go up to $2 trillion. And we were trying to take the politics out of it and protect the American people by having that flexibility and having government try to respond to the health situation as opposed to political horse trading. And so we were trying to get a little creative there. And I will tell you, on the vaccine side, the briefings that I've been privy to, and we work closely with the White House, and that's the other thing that we did and why we were so successful in moving the national conversation last week, in my humble opinion, is we are responsible members of Congress in the sense of we don't surprise our leadership. We kept the White House informed. Josh kept the Speaker's office informed and other folks, and we kept the Senate leadership informed with Mitch McConnell, and just said, hey, we're committed to doing this. If you guys aren't going to do it, we're going to do it, but we'll tell you what we're up to and demonstrate to you that we can do this. And so the White House was fully briefed on this. You saw some of the press events where the president talked about it. Mark Meadows talked about it. The press secretary for the White House talked about it. But in those briefings that we're getting on Operation Warp Speed, the good news is we're getting really good science about the vaccine in these trials, that they have kind of cracked the nut on what this virus is doing, and some very exciting scientific news coming out with a vaccine that's going to be hopefully on the market. And we should celebrate that as Americans. We should be proud of the fact that our innovators in the scientific world are coming up with solutions that are going to protect us and save thousands of lives by getting this out as quick as possible. And so I'm very confident that we're going to have some good news on this front. And that should be something we should be proud of as Americans, as opposed to playing even politics with that. That is part of the frustration I have, is that you're even seeing that being politicized now too, going into the election cycle. And that's just a shame. We got to stop doing that.
If you could address the unemployment issue, which of course is unprecedented in recent history, just a couple months ago. Dramatic shock, roughly half just a couple months ago. Roughly half the 22 million payroll jobs that were lost in March and April have been regained. But the unemployment levels, as we all know, are still extremely high. Just explain what your proposal does in terms of unemployment insurance, which is also very creative and innovative, and also you're concerned about an idle workforce. Do we need to be training, retraining those furloughed or unemployed workers?
Lots of good questions packed into there, and lots of important points, particularly about where the workforce is now and how high unemployment is. And you worry, frankly, we know things like restaurants and other service spaces are not coming back on as quickly as you'd hope, with limitations, of course, that still exist because of COVID and could exist going into the winter and into the fall into the winter, and I worry a lot about that. I think long term we need to be smart about retraining and recognizing that we have real challenges here, and the workforce is shifting and things are changing. We're seeing a need for new things like supply chain and things that we realize that we don't make in our country that we should be making. So I think certain sectors will have a resurgence in the coming months and years, but other things are going to be harder. There are going to be fewer jobs, and I worry about how people are struggling. Our unemployment proposal that we put in our package says that for 2 months we would do an extra $450 supplemental to the existing unemployment in the state, and then after 2 months of transition, it would go up to 100%, no more, of someone's current income, but capped out at $600. And the reason we came up with that is we think that there are people who can't go to work and obviously don't have jobs, and others for healthcare reasons or childcare reasons can't go back to work. But people shouldn't get paid more for not going to work, and I think that was a very important decision that we all, in discussing it, all came to, and we know that's been an issue in some sectors and from getting people back online. So we all believe that coupling not just with these resources with training and long-term thinking of how we're going to retool our workforce has got to be key, and and things like county colleges and others can be really important in that retraining, but to not be thinking that through doesn't make much sense to me. Unfortunately, Lori, I have to go to a committee hearing now. I'm really sorry, but this has been phenomenal. Thank you very much for having me, and if you have time for a little bit longer, you're lucky. He's got my proxy, but I just want to encourage everybody, please, let's work together. This is a time we really, our country needs to come together more than ever. I know there's plenty of partisanship and plenty of yelling and screaming, but we're so much better when we actually come together. So thank you so much, and everyone, I hope, stay safe and healthy.
Yes, and Congressman Reed, I'm going to keep you on for one more question from our audience, if that's okay. We have a question about the need among many professionals in this current environment to launch their own practice to work independently, and the question is, are there initiatives to support entrepreneurs and small service businesses that you may want to discuss?
COVID-19 has not stopped the entrepreneurial spirit of America, and we have obviously made that part of investments that we've supported, not only in this package but overall. I serve on the Ways and Means Committee, and so you got things like the Opportunity Tax Credit. You have things in the new tax code that we could highlight and continue to promote, and we would encourage folks, take advantage. I saw a recent report that came across my desk about the incentives that are built into the new tax code that have been left on the table at the end of the year, and they're just underutilized. And a lot of that has to do with folks not being aware of what we try to incentivize out there in regards to entrepreneurship and things of that nature. So reach out to the experts, but if we can be of any assistance, reach out to our office and to the Ways and Means Committee, and we can point you in the right direction to tremendous amounts of resources that are in the tax code as well as at the federal government from a small business perspective that could be utilized for cash flow assistance. And that's a big problem that we also recognize going through COVID-19. Is liquidity is a huge issue, and access to capital is something we're very sensitive to. And again, another reason why we need to have a stimulus package now, because if we don't get a stimulus package now, I'm afraid that the politics is going to continue after the election, and this election is going to be, with everything going on and with the ballots that are out and have to be counted and the potential dragging of this dispute well into January, into the seating of a new administration, be it Trump's second or Biden's first, relief could be potentially into January, February, even to March, is what some folks are telling us down here. That's a tremendous long way down the road, and liquidity becomes a
your feed in terms of video, but Congressman Reed and Congressman Gotthammer, thank you very much for your efforts, and Congressman Reed, it's been what the Problem Solvers Caucus is trying to do, and how they're trying to solve these problems are such a critical and necessary component to a political process. Working number of the, to our audience, a number of the issues we just discussed, CED is very close in terms of the solutions we're proposing. But we were going to take so I urge you to look at our solution briefs compendium. But in the meantime, we're going to take a few minutes break here, and we will come back with our panel of distinguished business leaders, CED trustees. We'll be back in a moment.
Can you, your team,
or your company benefit from
insights such as the ones provided in this webcast? They are immediately available when you join the Conference Board, a membership-based think tank that delivers trusted insights for what's ahead, reaching across industries and geographies. We bring together our noted experts, senior executives from the world's largest companies, and nonpartisan, practical research to help you address your most important.
Hello, and welcome back. Hi, Sheeta. Nice
Thank
to
you,
see you.
Lori. Good to be here.
Thank you for joining us.
I hear some feedback with my, do you hear feedback, or is it just me?
Lori, this is Carmine. Would you please turn your speakers down a little bit? That may help.
Carmine, are we ready to go here, or?
Waiting for Byron and Tom to join.
Okay,
Yes,
so
we
we're
are.
not live right now. Oh, yes, we are. Okay, hello to our audience again, and welcome to this, apologize for that, and welcome to our second panel. We're waiting for our two business leaders, Byron Boston and Tom McInerney. Byron is President and CEO of Dynex Capital, and again, Tom is President and CEO of Genworth, and we have Sheeta Bina with us right here live, who is the founding partner of Insigniam. And it is a privilege to have you. I am actually going to start the conversation, Sheeta, with you. We just had the co-chairs of the Problem Solvers Caucus on from the House, and they're working on bipartisan solutions. And as CED trustees, you and Tom and Byron are an important part of that effort, both in your individually in your own efforts as business leaders, but also as part of CED and our mission to try and find nonpartisan, bipartisan solutions led by our business leaders, leveraging your expertise. And I think we're going to just start the conversation here with asking you from your perspective. These are really unprecedented and unexpected times. beginning with the global pandemic, the ensuing economic crisis, and of course the seismic protests for social justice. And we've experienced the greatest macroeconomic shock since the 1930s, and it's been at a pace and a speed not seen before. So I would really like to start this discussion by asking you, what do you see as the greatest challenge facing America right now? What do you see as the top election issues?
Well, yes. So, you know, I think how I'm going to approach that question, and Lori, thank you for inviting me here, and hello to everybody else who's engaging in this discussion, both from a panel and from the participants. I think, just like you said, there's so much that perhaps a better way to look at it is with some kind of unifying context. So as a business person, I think we could look at the United States as in it's mostly in a turnaround. And if you were bringing in a new leader to oversee a turnaround, you would want that leader to be able to immediately approach it by understanding what's failing. And so if we looked at it from, okay, it's not working, it's failing in most aspects, not every aspect, where is it? What is the root cause of that? And I would say that ultimately what we are facing is a crisis of structural soundness. The elements that create the spokes on the wheel, that creates a functioning system, many of those spokes are eroded. Whether that be debt or the crumbling infrastructure, whether it's a demoralized people, the lack of leadership, poor management. I could go on, you know, basic processes such as election process being in jeopardy. So I would say that the real challenge is to elect a leader who's going to oversee a turnaround and who's looking at this like they have to oversee a turnaround. And as in any organization or system that's in trouble, there are voices that are louder than others, but if you try to pander to any one voice without restoring integrity to the entire system, you're ultimately going to lead to the full demise. And while I didn't point to a specific topic, I think the overall topic is, how is the next CEO of the United States going to turn this country around? And what's their plan for that?
And that's really interesting. And I'd like to welcome Byron and Tom to the discussion. And first turn to you, Byron, and then Tom, hopefully get your thoughts as well. Sheeta just emphasized the importance of CEO leadership from the next president. And the question was that, you know, obviously these are unprecedented times, and, you know, we've had the global pandemic, the economic crisis, the seismic protests for social justice, greatest economic shock since the 1930s. And just from your perspective, I'm asking, what do you see as the greatest challenge facing America right now, and what is the, would you characterize as the top election issue? And as I was mentioning to Sheila,
we do.
We have a lot to choose.
Can you hear me? Let me just test my mic first. Can you? You can hear me. Great.
Yeah.
Let me just say, at Dynex, we take risk every day, so we're always considering all of these issues from not only from just a community perspective, but also from a risk perspective. Human conflict has been at the top of our risk register for multiple years at this point. And so the top issue from our perspective and from my perspective is divisive leadership globally. And we're at a moment in history where we have multiple leaders globally who are pursuing strategies that are divisive. And as a globe, we have thousands of years of history of reasons why, in fact, that we can create conflict and division. And once we enter into a period where that has become part of the overall political environment, part of the government strategies, it becomes a very difficult environment. So we study history at Dynex. We look at the 1914 through 1944 period. That's the last time I think I can identify where I've seen this many leaders rise with a strategy that is encouraging divisions, whether it's along the lines, it could be along the lines of generation, it could be along the lines of race, it could be along the lines of gender, it can be along the lines of religion. And I'm seeing that throughout the world. And so at Dynex, surprises are highly probable. Where might we get surprised? We believe it may come through human conflict in ways that can surprise us all. This type of divisional leadership then gets exacerbated by the growth in technology and the power that technology has. While we sit and wait for a major, military conflict, that's not what's going to happen. Our country is being eroded from within, and it's not only the globe as a whole. But technology, imagine if you were in a period between 1914 and 1944, and they had the power of technology to distribute information. Imagine what that might be like. So human conflict is something that can erode in multiple ways through every part of our system. And our leaders are very important that our leaders globally, or at least we have more leaders who are operating from a perspective of cooperation. How do we work together? How do we find good solutions? Versus leaders who are looking to drive a divisive wedge in an effort to remain in power.
Tom, what do you say?
Laura, I think right now the most important issue is to get the economy back on track. I think we are, as you mentioned, this is an unprecedented situation where we decided to shut down the entire economy. I do think in a year from now, looking back, I think that will prove to have been a mistake because I do think we have probably permanently eliminated about 60% of small businesses, particularly in the restaurant, transportation, retail spaces. And so we're going to need to recreate all those jobs, and I think that's going to be a challenge. And I know you just had Josh Gottheimer and Tom Reed and the Problem Solvers Caucus members on. I've been working with them. I do believe that the CARES Act compromise that they proposed, which is somewhere in the middle between, I guess, $1 trillion and $3 trillion, and they have accelerators and decelerators that sort of adjust depending on what happens. So I think it's paramount that Congress and the administration work together to get the next CARES Act implemented and the money out. I think it should be primarily focused on small businesses and retraining all the people who've lost their jobs. I think, and I'm involved in a number of not-for-profits now trying to do retraining and donate money from corporations, including from Genworth, to cover the cost of that retraining. But I think of the 60 million jobs that were lost, some of which are coming back, but a lot are still out there, an overwhelming number fall on the disadvantaged communities, minorities, and others, the poor. They tend to have generally less skills, the poor that is, and so I really think we need to do one, get money to all of them, expand, keep the unemployment going. As Tom and Josh explained, I think they lower the 600 million if you hit the limit of what you were paid pre-COVID. But I do think we need to get money in all Americans' hands. Again, it's going to primarily be people at the bottom of the pay scale so that they can afford all the things they need to do to feed their family and survive, pay rent, etc. And then we've got to rebuild the engine of the economy to create incentives to get the jobs back, and particularly focus on developing skills for people who will find it most difficult to get jobs back, so that they hopefully can, and we can match, training them more, developing their skills further, and match them with jobs that are become available. So I think that's the most important thing that we can do in the next 12 months. I agree with what was said before, the divisiveness. I think there are very partisan leaders on both sides that are saying crazy things and doing crazy things, and it's not helpful, and that's got to be fixed. Hopefully the voters will take care of that by doing the right thing. But no matter who wins, the presidency, the Senate, the House, I think the country's got to work together to rebuild the economy and get back to where we were. I mean, we were at a place before COVID-19, before the end of February, where we had unemployment at 3.5%. Now, we still had people that were well behind, and the gap between the wealthy and the poor was as wide as ever and needs to be corrected. But we really need to get the jobs first, and once we get that, then I think we can look at some of these other broader long-term issues that we have.
Lori, I think Tom points to something that's really critical to underscore, which is the most vulnerable people in our population have gotten the triple whammy. So not only were they already at risk because their skills were not matching the shape of work in the future, not only were they already working with very low wages, but now those are the jobs that are eliminated. And I lose sleep over the concern for how many people are struggling to survive. To see food bank lines that are miles long with people in cars. So that means these are people who could afford to feed themselves just a couple of months ago and now are about to fall off the cliff. And then to put the fire to the fuel with the kind of incendiary, divisive speech that Byron's speaking of, I think we have a huge segment of our population that is at such risk it could destroy or significantly erode our core moving forward. And as a small business owner who happens to consult only big businesses, and so for that reason I could say we're okay, I see too many small business. That has been the engine of this country, not the big corporations. And so then we lose the access to lift so many people up when we lose the small businesses. It's dire. And I don't like to speak pessimistically about this country that I love so much.
Oh, can I add one thing onto this? It's not really even from my perspective, it's not even a pessimistic optimism. I look at history. This is what the cracks in the surface, even though unemployment rate was as low as it was, we have had for the multiple decades a growing population of people where the inequality differential, this is not a moralistic statement, this is an economic statement. That gap had been widening for some time. So in reality, Tom, you never get to that conclusion of saying, we need really good jobs, we really need to retrain, unless you have the right attitude when you come to the table. So let's find a solution for the United States. So in World War II, there was, oh no, we have an enemy here. Let's all lock arms together to fight this enemy. And we actually do have a common problem globally at this point, but it's very difficult for us to come together to lock arms to fight this problem. First off, this is not a complete agreement that even before this pandemic exacerbated these differentials, the differentials existed before that point in time. And again, I run a public company, I invest a lot of money, I've had this opinion for some time. What's happening this year is not a surprise. The divisiveness is not a surprise to me because these cracks underneath the surface of the global economy. University of Chicago professor wrote a great book about 10 years ago called Fault Lines. This has been a crack underneath the surface of the global economy. And at this point, the pandemic coming along exacerbates this problem. And I would love to continue to push for the good people of America to stand up and start to say, you know what, let's push back against the divisive conversation so we can get to what Tom says, let's talk about those really good solutions, which are possible.
Yeah, so right now the USAID, or at least as of July, the stimulus and relief aid is about 13% of GDP. I mean, that's a huge government involvement in the economy. And it was interesting because Congressman Reed was talking about how important that this second round of funding is for all of these sectors and the people who are being affected by a small business, as you mentioned, and the inequality that has been there all along that's now being exacerbated. And so just in terms of follow-on funding, in terms of the government moving ahead and the importance of that, how important do you see a follow-on stimulus relief bill in terms of the general economy to continue to function and function well, and how urgent is that? And I'd like to have all.
Well, maybe I'll start with and just say I think it's absolutely critical. I think it's a shame that it's being held hostage to the partisan rhetoric. I think we need at least $2 trillion, and I would focus it on unemployment insurance for people without jobs to get them. I think the Problem Solvers Caucus, the legislation that Tom and Josh proposed as a starting point, basically would make sure it would include the $500 million, I guess, versus the $600 million, but would make sure that everybody was back to 100% of what they were making before COVID-19. I agree with Byron that for a lot of people, the 100% was way, way too low. But let's at least get people back to that level. Then I think we have to put most of the support not on big companies, which was some of the support and the early part, but on small businesses to allow small businesses to either keep people on staff or bring them back. I do think it was a mistake to require and I think those for small businesses, the loans should be forgivable, and I think there should be, as the Problem Solvers Caucus bill, it should allow. At first, yeah, you got to keep your people on the payroll and pay them, but second, to the extent you also need money for rent or whatever to keep your business open, you ought to be able to use some of those funds for that. And then I think for businesses below a certain level of revenues, which would define them as small businesses, I think those loans should generally be forgiven. And so I think the sooner the better. And I do think if we get caught up in the election and the politics and we don't get that, let's call it $2 trillion plus whatever out soon, then I think we just exacerbate all the problems. And again, as all three of us, I think, have said, I don't worry so much about people who have plenty of savings to get by. Who were living paycheck to paycheck before the crisis, and now they don't have the paycheck. So they're really in trouble. And I think the priority should be on them. And then on small businesses, where both my colleagues have said that's where most of the job growth is anyway.
I would underline what Tom said. It's interesting we have operations in Europe, and the support that the government has given in Europe has been focused on the worker, not the business, and has made it possible for we can furlough people if we need to, and the government will make up the difference in their pay. But the focus has been on the employee and the worker with a little bit of support to the business, whereas in the U.S., the focus has been with the PPP and, well, now that we ran out of our unemployment insurance. But I think there's a third prong. More than ever, what we've seen that businesses are having to do is change, and they're having to innovate. And if there's somehow we could weave into the stimulus some incentive or opportunity for the smaller businesses that don't have the resources to reinvent themselves and innovate, and I don't mean that in some flighty way, but there's a requirement for different business models, and a lot of that needs to be funded in order to survive in the future. And I think we need to put some kind of attention on how do we equip these businesses to even be able to stand up in a post-COVID world. So that would be just the only thing I would add to what Tom said so eloquently.
Yeah, I think Tom did a phenomenal job of describing the situation. We're all in the same crisis, but we're all in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. Some of us are in, as we say, a super yacht. Others are in a rowboat, and some are hanging on by driftwood in the water. And I heard that phrase. I like that phrase. It sums it up well. And I think what you were saying, Tom, is target the funds to those that need it. Small business is extremely essential, and then certain parts of the population that really have been hit the hardest. There are industries, we know for a fact, retail, leisure, travel, entertainment, restaurants. We know what areas have been hit the hardest. And then if there's any way to put extreme caution to protect the government spending from those who should be in good enough shape to weather this crisis, to stop any abuse from taking place with this. At Dynex, we made a decision not to take a PPP. We said, look, you know what? We're investors. So the Fed stepped into the market in March. We said, we're fine. We're going to generate income. We're going to take care of our employees right here at Dynex Capital. We're not going to ask the government to do it. But there are definitively certain areas that need more help.
Well, if I could just underline something Byron said earlier that I don't want us to step over, which is what can we learn from history? And he gave the example of us coming together and unifying to fight a common enemy during World War II, which we're seeing particularly in biopharma, where the different large pharma are coming together, and small pharma, in beating this COVID. But I think the lesson we can also learn that the 30s, where there was so much economic suppression, where there were so many people who were suffering, both in Europe, which led to the rise of Hitler. I know, that's the H word is a horrible word to use, right? But also in the United States, we saw increased activity around socialism and communism. I think it's not nearly altruistic to say, oh, we have to make sure that the gap closes between the different stratas, economic stratas. But we have to, I think, learn from history that if we don't, there will be ramifications from that. And so it behooves us, out of our commitment to this country, to make sure we have a strong foundation that is inclusive, an economy that is inclusive so people don't have to turn to alternative models, economic models and political models, and yes, belonging, groups that they have affinity for, in order to have any experience of power or the opportunity to prevail in this environment. So I think it's so important that we not just let sink to the background the point that Byron was making about what can we learn from history.
That was a very powerful summary, and I'd like to just turn to a question from our audience, which is actually about infrastructure. And the question is, why isn't there stimulus for jobs, rebuilding infrastructure, national technology, upgrades, bridges? This did happen, going back to our reference to history. This did happen in the 1930s. Why isn't there an emphasis or a focus on this? I will add that this is a part of, as you all know as trustees, because you've led us in this direction in terms of CED's proposals. But in terms of our audience's question, why do you think this isn't more of a focus in terms of what Capitol Hill is focusing on?
I'm going to tell you it's bad leadership and bad management. I mean, if no one, infrastructure doesn't vote. So there's no voter called infrastructure. And if I have my attention on that, rather than on what do I need to provide for the biggest future for this company, then it's going to get short-shrifted. And yet all you have to do is fly into some of these countries that supposedly were behind us, just their airports. Fly to Doha, fly to Singapore, fly to Hong Kong, fly to other places, and then fly into JFK. And tell me there's not a threat to the United States when you just look at that simple infrastructure difference. But until there's a vote called infrastructure, I don't think there's going to be, and yes, you can create jobs from it, but I think it's just too subtle for today's politics.
Well, and so someone has to sell the idea. So think about, when I'm a child, we would drive from St. Louis to Mississippi. At first, there was not a full interstate system. There wasn't a full interstate system. So you could see, even in the 30s or 40s, you could come with a plan and say, we can build roads. Well, we have roads that are built today. We have bridges that are built, but some really need repair. but can the average American citizen understand that the bridge you want to cross, that you just want to cross fine, actually needs repair?
Right.
Or will they understand the value? So I go to China and I'm on one of the super fast rail lines. And it's like, wow, this is unbelievable. How great would this be for me to be able to be in Washington, D.C., run down to the train station, bolt up to New York, have a meeting in New York, and then bolt back to the office by the afternoon because the high-speed rail is that fast. And how would that promote commerce in the United States? So there are infrastructure ideas, but, you know, as a CEO, I have to sell my ideas for the future. I have to convince my shareholders of certain ideas, and in many situations, I may have to educate them exactly what is the idea, why are we partaking of this strategy. Infrastructure is a great word, but I'm not sure that if we covered the United States, whether even members of Congress, if everyone really understands what does that mean for 2020 versus what it meant for 1930 or 1940.
Like a myopia.
So I'd like to, as a final question, ask you, and I really do appreciate the time you've taken to share your thoughts with us, but if you were the moderator of the presidential debate coming up next week, what would be the first and most important question you would ask the candidates?
Well, I actually, go ahead, Tom, please.
Yeah, I think the two most important issues are how are we going to get the COVID-19 crisis behind us, you know, and whether that's vaccines or whatever, what's the strategy there? And then the second is, you know, what are you going to do specifically? What's your plan to get the economy back on track with specifically helping those at the bottom of the pyramid over the next 12 to 18, 24 months before we can educate them or train them to have other jobs. So those are the two things. I think we've got to solve the health issue, and it looks like we're, you know, making progress on the vaccines from everything I know. And then we just have to get money to, particularly the people who, you know, were living paycheck to paycheck before COVID, and now without a job, I don't know how they're surviving. And I think that has fueled the pressure on the protests and all of that. I think it's probably, you know, I think some of the fact that so many people have no hope, have no job, have no money coming in, you know, to me, it's logical why there's so many people, you know, out there protesting. But I think we've got to solve the health crisis so we can get back to generally normal. I think that will take a little longer, but I think it's going to be 3-4 years before we get all the jobs we've lost back, and particularly for the people that were already struggling. We really have to, one, give them money, and then two, help them develop the skills so they can get the kinds of jobs that are interesting, but also will pay them, you know, a living wage so that they can get beyond this, you know, paycheck to paycheck situation that maybe half the country was in, even when things were relatively strong before the virus.
Great. Lori, I would, first of all, I'd actually change the format of the debates, and you know, you're asking if I had a magic wand where I would have a objective fact checker weighing in after people answered, and some kind of immediate score for fact-based answers. The second thing is, I think we need to drive accountability, and I would ask the question, I would list perhaps this big wage gap, or the struggle the people are having to just survive, or health. I would pick one of the myriad issues, and I would ask each person on the debate stage, what have you done to contribute to this not working? So rather than asking for their solutions, which I would start by asking them to deal with their accountability.
And then from my perspective, this is a ginormous moment in history. So all the solutions and all the ideas we've talked about, they all have to get through this large moment that's in front of us, which is an election. So my first question would be, what actions will you take to ensure that we have a legitimate election and stop any and push back against anyone who questions our electoral process? Our election this fall is ginormous, and it's being questioned. It's being attacked externally from the United States, which we found out from our 2016 election. This is what I said. This is what technology is allowed to happen. But as leaders, the first thing we must do in a crisis is build confidence of those who are following us. So I've got two candidates. I want to know what action between now and November will they take to build confidence in this country, in our electoral process. The reason a Voting Rights Act exists, if we didn't have people who are willing to exploit our legitimate process, we wouldn't need a Voting Rights Act. That's why it's in place. That's why it was passed originally. I want to know actions today. What will you take to legitimize, ensure that everyone has a right to vote, whether they vote by mail or whether they vote in person and they're not intimidated and no one stands in the way, and then a smooth transition of power based on the results of the election. Otherwise, everything we say will be jeopardized. We've got to get through this monumental moment in history, which is this election of 2020 in November.
Well, thank you all so much. It is truly our privilege at CED to work with you as trustees of CED, and your leadership and your insights are so important, especially now, if there ever was a time for business leadership, given the incredibly crushing effect that COVID-19 has had on the economy and its impact on the American people. It's now, and it's really our privilege to have hosted you today and to be able to profit from your insights. So with great appreciation, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And so that concludes today's discussion, and I'd like to thank again my speakers for joining us, both our first session with the Congressman and then our business leaders. I'd also like to thank you, our audience, for taking part in this conversation as well. If you enjoyed today's program, we hope you join us for our next Public Policy Watch, December 3rd at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll be focusing on the topic of recovering and rebuilding in America, the 2021 agenda. And giving advice will be also working off of our plan to put together a agenda for the next administration in terms of what the top priorities are. And so please join us for that. Please download the slide deck from our download pod below and click on the link to register for this program. You can also review a complete list of all of our upcoming webcasts at conferenceboard.org/webcasts. Next slide, please. Sustaining Capitalism. And we also want to invite you to subscribe to our podcast series, Sustaining Capitalism. As we've been discussing today, and as Sheeta Bina said so potently, that the point here is, in terms of our mission with Sustaining Capitalism, is to ensure prosperity for all Americans, and that capitalism is working for all Americans. And we really invite you to participate in this podcast series. It will connect you with experts from the Committee for Economic Development to receive nonpartisan, fact-based policy responses to today's most pressing economic, educational, and social challenges. And check out our entire podcast lineup at conferenceboard.org/podcasts. Finally, please don't forget to fill out the program evaluation form that will appear on your screen at the end of this program. We would love to hear your thoughts about this webcast and how we can improve your experience with these programs. Again, I'm Lori Murray, and thank you for joining us today.